You know, it was about halfway through this study that I realised that, in preparing for this study, I realised that I'd bitten off a little bit more than I could chew. I was rather ambitious in thinking that we could do Joab justice in doing just two nights. And to rub salt into the wounds, Brother Paul Hadley, who's Colin's brother-in-law, is he from Sydney, Colin? Sydney. Must have been tuning in last week, and he said, I did Joab years and years ago, which is really nice to know someone else has done Joab. And he said it took me 4 nights, and he sent me his comprehensive notes. You should have seen him. There was so much good information. Thanks, Paul, if you're watching, by the way. And I thought, oh, wow, what do I do now? But it is what it is. We've got 2 nights, so we're going to continue on full speed, and that's why we're only just grabbing the highlights of Joab's complex character as we continue this particular study. Now, we left Joab last week having killed Abner, and much to the angst and distress of the great King David. And when I say the great King David, he was a great king, but he seemed very powerless against Joab. He was deeply upset that Joab had killed Abner. And Joab had acted with complete disregard and complete impunity. Even though we know that Abner had to be out off the scene, it was the method and the way in which Joab goes about his particular job. And it was such a thing that when David was following after the coffin of, if you like, of Abner as he's being buried, and he's quite saddened, and all the people can see that David's not implicated in this, that Joab is. And as David's following down after the coffin, he talks about Abner as being slain at the hands of the wicked. So he's grabbed hold of Joab straight away and he's pocketed him straight into that wicked little envelope. You're a wicked man, Joab. And he says this. He says, I am the chosen king, but Joab and Abishai have more power than I do. Now that's a pretty bold statement. So God will have to pay them back for the evil things they did. Now, you'll notice he's grabbed Abishai in this, because Abishai was there when Abner was killed, but it was Abner's decision, it was Abner's knife, it was Abner that plunged in the knife, and because Abishai was there, David roped him in. But Abishai was not like his uncontrollable brother. Abishai was a more honourable man. He's mentioned as one of the mighty men in Chronicles by David. So, but you know, you wonder why David mourned for Abner. And perhaps some of the people thought, why are you mourning for Abner? Could he have been a potential traitor? Well, more than likely, yes, because we saw how he was reacting with Ishbosheth and behind the scenes of what his real motivation was, and perhaps Joab could see that. But you know what? I reckon that David saw in Abner something he didn't see in Joab. I think he saw an opportunity to change Abner's mind and Abner's character. Just like he'd changed many of his mighty warriors when they first met up with them, he was able to change them. So just maybe David saw something in Abner that he just never saw in Joab whatsoever. But it made no difference. Joab just did what he wanted to do. And you wonder to yourself, what sort of punishment did David give to Joab? What did he mete out for Joab? You remember when Ishbosheth was killed? Ishbosheth, Saul's son, who, a pretty weak sort of a man, was placed into the kingship over the northern tribes, if you like, over Israel, over all 11 tribes except for Judah. And there's Ishbosheth, he's there, he's still the king. And 2 servants went in thinking they're going to do David a great big favour. And they lopped off the head of Ishbosheth, and they couldn't wait to tell David, we've just done you a big favour. We've got rid of the king up in the north, Ishbosheth. He would have caused you no end of trouble, and that might have been true. How did David respond to that? He grabbed hold of those 2 servants, he cut their heads off, and he executed them and made a public demonstration of what he felt about that. Doesn't do anything like that with Joab. Because I am powerless against that man. I don't know how to handle him. He is so difficult. Well, one thing we do know he did, and it's not in the record, but we know this is the case. He said, righto, Joab, you're fired. You're losing your position as captain of the army. And so he takes that prized position that Joab wanted. That was what he wanted to be. I want to be the captain of the army. That's what I grew up. My mindset was to be at the head of all the army, and I just wanted to be there. And David took it off him. But not for all that long, because he rescues it back again. He's like that clown we mentioned in the first class, you know, you punch it down and boom, up it comes again, and he's going to raise his head again and get that position back. Because now we're going to very quickly look at David looking for another city to take, and he's going to take Jerusalem, and guess what? Joab raises his head yet again. So things have died down somewhat. Abner's dead, Ishbosheth is dead. It's now time to patch the difference up between Judah and the rest of Israel. So the north and the south had to combine together. David is going to be made king of the whole lot, and he needs a city to reign out of. Hebron's not suitable now. It's in the Judah's territory. He needs a city that is more central. So he eyes off none other, of course, than Jerusalem. And that is where he wants to make his headquarters as king over Israel. Now, Jerusalem at that time was known as Jebus. It's a Canaanite city. It had been, at this time, ruled by the Jebusites, and it had never been conquered in over 400 years. Many tribes, many other peoples had tried to conquer that city, and they had never been able to conquer it. So Joab grabs all these mighty men in his army, and he surrounds that city, and he's eyeing it all off, working out, what sort of strategy am I going to need to get into that city to conquer it and make that our city, our capital city? Well, the Jebusites are all standing on top of the walls, laughing their heads off at David. And I'm paraphrasing a lot of the quotes because we don't have time to look these up, but they're on the screen there anyway. In 2 Samuel 5, they're laughing their heads off at David and taunting him, saying, you know what, David, guess what? We could bring all our blind up and all our lame people up here and put them on the walls, and all our soldiers would go down basic and have a merry old time, and you still wouldn't get into this city, no matter how mighty you are. Well, of course, that's a red flag to David, isn't it? Yeah, taunting David in that fashion is just going to make him all the more determined. And he wanted this city to be the city that would weld Judah and the rest of the tribes, the rest of Israel together as their capital city. So he strategically thinks, how am I going to get hold of this particular city? So what does he do? He sets out a challenge. The challenge is outlined in 1 Chronicles 1. The challenge is very simple. He says, whoever can conquer that city, I am going to make them the captain or the commander-in-chief of my defence forces. Now, in my mind, I try to picture how all this played out. And I try to imagine David is standing there and he's yelling out this challenge to all these mighty men, and he's deliberately not making eye contact with Joab. Joab's over here, so he's not going to look at him, and he's looking at all these other mighty men, and he's kind of hoping that the likes of Shamar and Elhanan and Helez, and they were all wonderful mighty men that David named, and he's kind of hoping they're going to step up to the plate and take on this idea of taking Jerusalem. So he puts out the challenge, whoever is going to do it, you are going to become the commander-in-chief. And Joab's over there, and that's where the voice comes from, in a big, booming, loud voice. I'll go. I'll be the one. And I just can imagine David putting his head in his hands going, oh, no, no, no. I don't want Joab in that position. It causes me nightmares. I can't sleep. It worries me. I can't control him. I don't want him in that position. But you know, when Joab says that in that record, 1 Chronicles 11, as soon as he says, I'll do it, not one other mighty warrior steps up to say, well, hang on, I wouldn't mind having a go either. Not one. And there were plenty of mighty men, really strong, tough men. Not one of them dare stand against Joab. That's the power this man had. That's the influence this man had. And when he took that city, wow, what a miracle that was in itself. Some of us have walked Hezekiah's tunnel, and we know the area in which Joab had to climb up the conduit up into the city. You really almost have to be like a Superman to do it, and he did it. He scaled the underwater cistern, and we're not going into this in any detail, where they had thought that nobody could ever do what Joab did, but he did, and he climbed up the tunnel, and he was able to get inside the city. It was an incredible feat on its own. And he got up into that city, and there's no doubt he probably fought a few soldiers on the way to those gates, 5-ton gates that were there, lifted off the great big bars of the gates himself with one sword in his hand, fighting the soldiers, lifting off the gates, bursting open the gates, and in comes David and all the mighty men. It was really like a miracle. It was an amazing feat. Heroic feat. It is no wonder, brothers and sisters and young people, it's no wonder all the people absolutely loved that man and adored him and admired him, because everything he did seemed to be so amazing. The feat, the strength, the incredible endurance that man had. So guess what? He's bounced back again. David's got to honour his word. Joab's got the position back. He's now commander-in-chief. Remember we said he held that position 3 times. He got fired twice. Now he's back into this position. Well, everything is going along pretty smoothly. He wins back the captaincy. He keeps bouncing back. And then we're introduced to some of his amazing campaigns. Let's just look briefly at one. I just want to show you how amazing a strategist this man was when it came to warfare. It's no wonder David really did put a lot of emphasis on Joab helping out with his military campaigns, and David had quite a number of them. I just want to show you one. I want you to come to 2 Samuel chapter 10. Have a look at this. This is just brilliant. This is the man and how he thinks. And by the way, we're going to see here how he does have a little bit of a spirituality, a bit of a spiritual mind, which we're going to see in his comment that he makes. And we're not going to read these verses. I'm going to paraphrase it, but you can see it in 2 Samuel chapter 10. First 10 verses, very quickly, is all about the king of Ammon dying. Now, the king of Ammon had obviously shown quite a bit of kindness to David, and David felt like, well, he's dead now. His son Hanun is coming to reign. I just want to go and just give my sympathies and hope all's going well, and all good intentions by David. So he sends up some servants to Hanun, and Hanun, just like all newbies coming on the scenes, thinking, oh, how do I interpret this? Here comes David's servants, and he listens to his princes. You know, it's time and time again we see that happening in Scripture. He listens to ill advice, and they go and tell him, hey, listen, I wouldn't trust these servants. They're probably coming up to spy out the land. It wasn't what David's intention was. He had a very noble intentions of showing the sympathy to the king's son for having lost his father. Well, these servants, this king, Hanun and his men, grab hold of David's servants and they humiliate them. They shave half their beards off, make them look absolutely like clowns, cut half their robes off and sent them back to David. Now, it was a really humiliating, terrible way in which to treat this particular event. Well, it didn't take long before they realised that this had greatly upset David, and so they thought, uh-oh, big swallow, David's going to deal with this, what are we going to do? So they rush out and they grab 33,000 mercenaries from Syria, and there's going to be this, they think they've got the numbers, we're going to hold back David's men from attacking us. Well, what does David do? When David heard of this humiliation, this is verse 7, when David heard it, what does he do? He sends Joab. Joab, I need you to deal with this. You're the man I know will deal with it. Can you go and fix this issue up? I mean, who else is he going to pick? He can't pick anyone. He picks the captain of his army, but he's the obvious choice. And Joab, you could see him licking his lips and sharpening his sword and going, yep, you beauty, let's get down there and deal with it, because that's the type of man he was. And he goes down to the children of Ammon, and here's how the battle pans out. And it's the rest of the verses, so we're not going to deal with it in any detail, but I'll tell you what happened. The Ammonites were one army, and the mercenaries from Syria were the other army. And what they had done is they'd worked out how they were going to attack Joab and his mighty men. And when they saw what was going on, Joab looks, he's got the Ammonites ahead of him, and he looks behind, he's got the Syrians behind him. They were going to just come in like that and just destroy Joab's army, and that was going to be all over. Joab, Abishai was with him, felt outnumbered. So what they do is they get into a flanking position where they're back to back. So Joab's this way, with Abishai that way, facing that way. So Abishai's facing the Syrians, Joab's facing the Ammonites, and all their mighty men are in a great line doing the same thing, back to back. And Joab turns around to Abishai and says, hey, listen, if the Syrians get too hard for you to manage, I'll turn around and our men will turn around and help you. But if the Ammonites get a little bit hard for us, you turn around and you help us. This was a brilliant military strategy. It's like coming up against a brick wall where you've got reservists behind you to be able to help you fight. This is Joab's brilliant mind and brilliant strategy. But it's what Joab actually says that is quite important. Here's what he says in verses 11 and 12. Here it is. It's on the screen. If the Syrians are too strong for me, then I shall help, you can help me. If the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I'll come and help you. Be of good courage, he says, and let us be courageous for our people and for the cities of our God. And may Yahweh do what seems good to him. Now that's placing your trust in God without presuming that God should give you the victory. You know what he's saying? What we say every morning, every Sunday when we give the announcement. God willing. If it's God's will, we will get through this. That's what he's saying. So herein lies the complexity of Joab's character. Somewhere back in there, in the deep recesses of his mind, there is some form of a conscience, some sort of spirituality that comes out, and he means it. There's no doubt he means it in this particular case. Be of good courage, he goes on to say, and let us play the men for our people, for the cities of our God. May it happen according to Yahweh's will. And not only does he demonstrate this on this particular occasion, brothers and sisters, but he has this sporadic moments of spirituality in his life. We're not going to go through all of them, but there's a few of them that do stand out. There's this one, of course, which we've just talked about, where he does place everything in God's hands and makes that known to all his men that are with him. He uses actually complex matters of God's law to convince David to initially forgive Absalom. You know, when he sends the woman down and there was that rather convoluted story about, hey, you need to have Absalom back and so on. And it's really quite based on forgiveness and on the law and everything that Joab seemed to be opposed to, mercy, forgiveness and all of those things. And in the end, it was so, that whole story was so amazing and so influential to David that David turns around and says, is Joab behind this? He knew that Joab knew his Bible. He knew that Joab knew the law. He knew a lot of things about Joab, but unfortunately they were tucked away too far back in his mind to keep on coming to the surface. And then, of course, he understood the principles of God's law when he admonished David for wanting to number Israel. Now, I know there's different ways of understanding how that event played out, but Joab again could pick up at that particular occasion that it was wrong. And he had a mind that would think on spiritual levels at times. So anyway, he won that victory over Ammon and the Syrians. And he's now riding the crest of a wave. Everything's going so brilliantly for the man. He's loved even more now He's got the position he wants. He has the respect he wants by everybody. His ego is being, exercised. He's loving the whole thing. And then comes the next chapter, chapter 11 of 2 Samuel, which is one of the lowest points in David's life. And I believe also one of the worst moments in Joab's life, because he was complicit with what actually went on in this entire event. Before we deal with that, let me just tell you the fear of Joab went beyond Israel. Talking to Max about this last week. And Max, thank you for bringing it up, because I had to search where this was, but it was really interesting. The fear of Joab went beyond Israel because previous to this, Joab, on it was actually the fourth military campaign against Edom, Joab took 6 months to kill all the males of Edom. They had to wipe out the male population of Edom. Joab was fighting this military campaign for 6 months, but a few got out of Edom. And one of those that got out was this man here, Hadad. Hadad got out of there when he was only a child, and he went down into Egypt. And there he stayed for years. He grew up, he got married, he married into Pharaoh's household. He was being treated like a king. They loved him down there. He had everything that was going for him. And then one day, he hears that Joab's dead. "You beauty," he says, "at long last, I can now go back home." He dare not enter and head back into the Edom territory while Joab was still alive. That's the influence and the fear that Joab had in that region. Right down into Egypt, this man here says, "No way am I setting foot out of Egypt to go back home while that man is still alive." Quite interesting, isn't it? So let's have a little look at this complicity with covering up David's sin. Again, we're not dealing with this sin at all. Of course, David sadly dug himself a huge, massive hole of deceit which led to murder. And the only person that David felt was able to be a co-conspirator in all of this and help him in his vulnerable moment was Joab. He had no one he knew apart from Joab who would blindly uphold his orders to put Uriah, to make sure Uriah was killed in battle. In the hottest part of the battle, put him there, and I know that Joab's not going to ask any questions. And the fact that Joab didn't ask questions means to me that I think he knew what was going on. And he knew, I've got to protect David, because to protect David was to protect his own position. He had to protect David at all costs. So yes, he was as loyal as they come, but wow, what a mistake to hold back on correcting David on this occasion. Plus, there ended up being something else that ended up in Joab's hand, which I think really would have assisted Joab. We don't know whether he used this against David or not, but I'll tell you what, it was a pretty good trump card that he would have had in his hand, and that was the letter. David used Joab to the absolute fullest of Joab's utter loyalty to David, and he did that when it suited David. Here he is saying one moment, "Oh, you're just too hard for me, may God bring down, the punishments on your head because you deserve it and you're a wicked man." Suddenly, the two of them are like this. And David writes this letter. "Joab, I've got a very, very good job for you to do, a top secret job for you. I want you to take Uriah, I want you to set him in the hottest part of the battle, and whatever you do, do not attempt to save him. Even if it looks as though he's going to be killed, do not attempt to save him. He's not to return home." That's pretty well what the letter said. "Yours sincerely, your King David." Now, Joab would have known that's a dodgy order. That's a dodgy order that you've given me, David. Joab knew that Uriah was a very honourable man and he did not deserve to die in battle in this method. Joab vehemently, as we said before, he vehemently opposed David's orders to number Israel, but he doesn't do a thing here. He remains stony quiet, dead set quiet. So why didn't Joab question David's order to have Uriah killed? Well, as we've already said, protecting David was protecting himself. And I think when he got hold of this letter, he was a smart cookie, Joab was, a very smart man. I'll carry out this because I've got to protect myself. But you know what? This letter, I'll just fold that up and put it in my top pocket. And I'll make sure I've got that because I might need it sometime down the future. Because that could have been used very well in blackmail. So it unfolded in a dreadful manner, as we know, and we know the outcome of that particular story. Well, it doesn't end, of course, because the next event that happens after this event is Joab killing David's absolutely idolised son, Absalom. Now, arguably, this is one of the greatest and most difficult moments of tension that comes between these two men. David's adored son, idolised son, was about to be killed was killed at the hands of Joab. Now, we know that Joab had to be removed. He was toxic for Israel, toxic for David. He had to be removed. But yet again, Joab just goes out there, disobeys a direct order from David not to harm this man, this son of the king. Don't harm him at all. And he disobeys that order, and we know the story, not covering it yet again, but suffice it to say this, that this moment in David's life left David in arguably one of the most vulnerable positions he has ever been in, where he could have lost the kingship. This was an opportunity where Joab could have taken that position away from David and become the king. And he wouldn't have had any opposition from David's men, because at this stage David had alienated himself from his mighty men. And Joab could see all this going down, and he could have come in there and said, "Righto, David, you're too weak for this. Get out, go away. You're not king anymore. I'm taking control." He could have. It doesn't even enter his mind to do that. This is the complexity of the man. He wasn't interested in being the king. He just wanted his position. That was it. And so what he ends up doing, brothers and sisters, is he ends up shaking David out of this absolute moment of weakness. He's going to shake him out of this moment of absolute vulnerability. And it was some very wise words of counsel. However, there was one ingredient missing in his counsel to David on this particular occasion. See if you can pick up what it is. Here's how it goes down. This is the quote. 2 Samuel 19:5-7. Joab bursts in. David's crying his eyes out. My son's dead, oh Absalom, Absalom, my son, he's dead. And he's crying his eyes out. All the men are standing outside the palace. They can hear this weeping of the king. They're wondering, what on earth is going on? What's he crying for? What is happening? And in goes Joab into the king's room, and he says, "Now listen here, David." And he's pretty forthright. You can get that from the language in the Hebrew. You can see what's going on here. He says, "Stand up. Wake up yourself. What do you think you're doing?" Joab's the only one that can speak like this to David. He goes in there and says, "Wake up yourself, David. You know, today we just saved your life. We saved your son's life. We saved your concubine's life, your wife's life. We just saved your life. We put our life on the line to save yours. And you're making us feel ashamed of what we've done. You seem to love those that hate you and hate those that love you. Where's your mindset, David? What are you doing? You've made it very clear today that your commanders and your troops mean nothing to you. They've got no value whatsoever. It looks as though if Absalom had lived," he said, "and we had all died, you'd be happy. Now you need to get up off that ground. You need to be stopping your crying right here and now, and you need to go out there and you need to congratulate those men, because I'll tell you this, if you don't do that, there won't be one of those men still out there waiting to serve you by tomorrow morning. And your life will be far worse than it's ever been up until this point in time." Now they were wise words of counsel. Make no mistake about it. David needed a bit of jolt of reality at this time. David was on the wrong wavelength, even spiritually, to be placing so much love and emphasis into this terrible son he had of Absalom. But there was still an ingredient missing in that comment by Joab, and you know what it was? Zero compassion. No mercy. There's no putting your arm around him and say, look, I can understand this. And he could have put it a different way, but no, he goes in. He's the type of man, hit hard, don't worry about the consequences. That's the way Joab did. That was Joab's life. No mercy, no compassion. Compassion to Joab was a sign of weakness. You won't find it in his life. It's a sign of weakness. And I don't know whether David was ever told the method in which Absalom died, but it was pretty horrendous. We know Absalom got his great, beautiful, long, flowing locks. Beautiful looking man, handsome. You know, everybody idolised him, adored him, and his hair got caught in the tree. And the servants come back and they tell Joab, Joab, guess what? Absalom's caught in the tree. And what's Joab say? Well, did you kill him? No, not touching the man. Didn't you hear the king's order? I wouldn't do it if you paid me $1 million. I'm not touching him. The king said, don't touch him. Get out of my way, Joab says. I don't have time to listen to this nonsense. And down he went and he saw Absalom in the tree, struggling like crazy. And without talking to him, without saying anything, he got 3 darts, whether they were arrows, whether they were daggers, whether they were javelins, I don't know. It just calls them darts. And he went up to him, and I could imagine him eyeing off Absalom, and he said, here we go. Boom, number 1, number 2, and number 3, and he strategically placed those darts so that the man didn't die. He didn't die. He's now hanging by his hair, struggling around, and Joab walks off and he leaves 10 more men to beat him up to death. That's how Absalom died. You read it. The record's there. That's a brutal killing. That's how Joab operated. Fear. Fear. Nobody dare take on Joab. No compassion, no mercy. Just get the job done. So that was another incident that we see in Joab's life, and we start to get a bit more of a picture of why David couldn't handle the man. Well, David again sacks Joab. This is the second sacking now. He sacks him. He says, I've had enough of this. You've killed Abner. You've killed my son Absalom. I've had enough. I've got to think strategy now. Joab, you're out of that position. I'm going to actually now put Amassa into the position. Now, Amassa was Joab's cousin, probably played together, a bit like maybe David and Joab. They're all maybe the same age. Amassa's the son of Abigail, David's sister. And he's a cousin, he's a nephew to David. And David sets Amassa up to be the commander-in-chief. Now, Amassa was actually the commander-in-chief of Absalom's army. So what David's thinking, you know what, Absalom's now dead. If I grab hold of Amassa and put him as head of my army, that actually might breach the gap between all those following Absalom, and maybe it might show that, hey, I'm doing something quite, nice and merciful here, and I want to bring us all back together. I think there's a strategy involved in putting Amassa into this particular position. And the worst he could do to Joab was take that position away from him. And I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that Joab would have been seething. Not again, David. Not again. And especially Amassa. I mean, he's the one we've been fighting against. He was my equivalent on the battlefield, on the enemy side. And you've put him as captain? He would not have been at all happy. And now comes another dimension of Joab's character. As if we didn't see it when he took on Absalom, we're going to definitely see how he handles Amassa. So Joab, I believe, sees Amassa as a traitor. He's another man in Joab's life that you can't trust. And he has taken Joab's spot as captain of the army. So here's some of the... We already know how proud Joab was, how he was jealous, how he was very vengeful, but now we're going to see just how cruel he can be. So I want to explain to you what he did to Amassa. And by the way, can I just say, and I'm just going back a little bit because it just came into my mind then, talking to Steve last week about when Abner was killed, all right, he was killed with a dagger straight into the stomach and he died. But when Abner was killed, Abner was inside Hebron at the time when Joab was looking for him. And Hebron is a city of refuge. So if you don't think that Joab knew his Bible, you think about this. When he wanted to go and get Abner, he thought, oh, hang on, he's inside Hebron. That's a city of refuge. This could get legally very messy for me if I just go in there and kill him. So he goes, Abner, come out here. So he drags Abner out of the city to the gate. So now he's no longer in Hebron, so therefore he's not in the city of refuge, and therefore he kills Abner. He knew his Bible. He knew what this Bible was all about. He knew the law. He was a clever man. But he takes this to the next level when he deals with Amassa as far as cruelty is concerned. So here's what happens. Here it is in 2 Samuel 20, verses 8 to 12. And I'll paraphrase this, what goes on. He wants to get Amassa. So Amassa's coming along, and Amassa's got no need, no thought that Joab's going to have it in for him. Because he doesn't show any sign of any awkwardness at all. He just comes up. Joab says, "Oh, Amassa, how are you?" But what Joab does is he has his sword tucked into his sheath, but he undoes it so that it actually falls out on the ground. As he's walking over, "Oh, Amassa, come on over. How are you, my cousin?" And then the sword falls out. "Oh, hang on a second." And he picks up the sword in his left hand, which he would not be of left-handed, he's probably a right-handed. So at this point in time, Amassa's not thinking anything. And Joab says, "Amassa, my cousin, come on over here." And he grabs him by the beard to give him a kiss, as they did in those days, a kiss on each cheek. "How are you?" Ooh! Straight up into the stomach, right there. Just one blow, it says. Not to kill him, pulls the sword out, and out comes all the intestines and the blood oozing all over the ground. Amassa's just got this shocked look on his face. He falls down onto the ground, and the word is very descriptive. And there he lie, wallowing in his intestines and his blood, not dying straight away. And Joab looked at him and didn't put him out of his misery. Turned away and went away, and another soldier comes up and he looks, and everyone's looking and going, "This is not too good while this is going on." So they pick up Amassa, they take him over to the side of the road, they throw him in a ditch while he's still alive, and they throw a blanket over him. That's the cruelty of that man, Joab. We really shouldn't be admiring men like that, but I would say that many of his fellow soldiers and warriors probably thought, "Hey, you're going a bit far here. This is nothing but cruelty." But that's what happened, and it's unfortunate that Joab had these qualities, because he could have been so much better, but he wasn't. And now we get to the last few moments of his life. Amassa's taken off the scene, of course. Guess what? Joab takes the reins again of being commander-in-chief. He takes that reign back again, and David's just beside himself. He's very, very distressed that this has happened. 3 times this has now happened to David. Abner, Absalom, and now Amassa. And as time went on and David was near the end of his life, and he's wanting to set, rightfully so, the heir to the throne, which is Solomon, up. And behind the scenes is going on a little bit of treason. And Adonijah, another Solomon's older brother, another son of David, is wanting to take the kingship and thinks he's got the numbers, a bit like Parliament, got to get the numbers to see who's going to follow you. Well, he thought, "I've got it made because I've got Joab on my side." Adonijah thought, "You beauty, who's going to ever be able to take me on? I've got Joab and I've got the priest. I've got Abiathar the priest. What more could I ask for?" And he goes down and he goes out of the palace, and they set up this great big marquee to have a mighty big beautiful party to celebrate the fact that he's going to be made king. And David hears about it, and we know the story. Quickly sets Solomon up to become king, sounds of trumpets, the whole of the city are in absolute, great celebration, and Solomon's made king, and Adonijah and Joab are down and say, what's that I hear? What's going on? And they hear that Solomon's been made king, and everything goes pear-shaped for Adonijah, Joab and Abiathar. And it's got to be dealt with, not just at that point, but these men have to be dealt with, especially Joab. And so we read in our reading, come over to 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 2. David says concerning Joab in 1 Kings chapter 2, we've got to deal with this man. And here's what he says in verse 5, 1 Kings chapter 2. Moreover, thou knowest also what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, and what he did to the two captains of the hosts of Israel, Abner the son of Ner, and Amassa the son of Jether, whom he slew, and shed the blood of war in peace, and put the blood of war upon his girdle that was about his loins, and in his shoes that were on his feet. That's just adding a little bit of more description as to how dreadful this whole idea of when Joab killed men during times of peace, that the blood not only splattered all over himself, it ran down his legs into his shoes. That's what that's saying. So what does David tell Solomon to do? Speaking to Solomon, he says, Solomon, according to your wisdom, don't, whatever you do, let Joab die of old age. Do not let his hoary head go down to the grave in peace. He has got to be taken out. But David couldn't do it himself. He couldn't bring himself to do it. He could not bring himself to be even an eyewitness to the death of one of his most loyal servants, but also the most spiritually reckless servant. He couldn't bring himself to even witness that this could take place. It had to happen after his death, and Solomon had to deal with it. It was left to the duty of Solomon. And look at what Solomon says. Oh, we've already read that, but we know what Solomon does, and he takes care of the matter. And what does Joab do? Well, the record says, as we read in 1 Kings 2, as Caleb read for us, he runs into the temple and he grabs hold of the horns of the altar. Why would he grab hold of the horns of the altar? Well, the altar represents mercy and forgiveness. That's where the sacrifices went, right? That's where they all happen. And the horns were to tie down the sacrifices. So when you grabbed hold of the horns of the altar, it's like you're seeking to have mercy and forgiveness. In fact, if we won't go there because we haven't got time, in Amos chapter 3 verse 14, there's quite a good quotation there that would indicate the horns being exactly about mercy and forgiveness, because that's a time in Israel's history where the prophet Amos came along and said, no mercy anymore, you're about to be judged. God's going to chop the horns of the altar off. Don't even try and reach out and grab those horns of the altar, because you're not going to be shown any mercy and forgiveness. That was the inference in Amos chapter 3 verse 14. And why did he go in there and grab hold of that? Well, you know why, because it worked for Adonijah. Adonijah did the same thing. He ran into the temple and he grabbed hold of the horns of the altar, came to Solomon's notice, that was done, and Solomon said, well, let's give him one more chance. He is my brother, we'll give him one more chance. So maybe Joab's thinking, well, if it worked for Adonijah, it might just happen to work for me. No, it wasn't going to work, and so in comes Ben-Aiah. Let me read a commentator's words of the final moments of Joab's life. And this is how he portrays how it would have went down. Beads of sweat dotted across his brow, sharp pains jabbed from within the pit of his stomach, fueled by fear, desperation, helplessness and dread, his hands and fingers locked onto God's sacred altar, slipping from perspiration as he held on for dear life. And then he heard a noise. Someone was coming. Joab glanced over his shoulder and saw the shadow of his executioner stretch across the floor. The end was drawing near. As he cowered and he trembled, his face frozen in shock and horror, he knew that his plea for mercy would fall on deaf ears, and he accepted his final fate. He knew, all right, brothers and sisters and young people, because he never once showed mercy. He never once showed compassion. No point in him asking for it. We know there's multiple quotes in Scripture that we should be showing mercy and compassion in our life, and if we don't expect to get it at the judgment seat. That's exactly what was going on with Joab here on this occasion. Just an interesting few concluding slides here. Joab and Judas. Quite an interesting little connection here between the two. Both men betrayed another with a kiss. Both slew innocent blood. His blood be upon us and our children were phrases used for both Joab and Judas. Both were condemned in the temple. Both were buried in their own plot. You notice that in the last verse there, in verse 34 of 1 Kings 2, that he was buried in his own house in the wilderness. Joab was not buried in the family plot. He had his own little block of land stuck somewhere out in the desert. That's where they buried him. And both were buried in their own plot, not the family tomb. Both men were very self-centred who never changed, and both had their position taken by another. Quite an interesting little, that you might get a bit of an understanding of the Old Testament type of Judas, if you like. And that was Joab. So let's conclude, brothers and sisters, with a few little pointers for us. I think the people had some lessons to learn when Joab was in their life and in their history, and I call it be careful of the 3 A's. Admiration. You know, there's no doubt that everyone, including David, admired Joab. No doubt at all. Adoration. Many people would have adored Joab. And then adulation. Some people would have worshipped Joab. And unfortunately, they did it all for the wrong reasons. I guess we can admire. You might say, well, why would they admire? That's terrible. Why would you admire somebody like that hasn't got a spiritual bone in their body? Why would you do that? He did have a spiritual bone, but he just didn't show it very often. But why would you do that? And we sit there and go, that's terrible. I wouldn't admire anyone like that. Well, let me put these pictures on the screen. Let me ask you the question. How many of these people perhaps we might admire in our life? All right? There's nothing wrong with admiring people that perhaps have achieved something quite interesting in their life. I'm pretty certain we all admired the Queen. She deserved respect. She did live a very interesting and a very full life, and she did achieve a lot for her country. And we had an admiration for the Queen. But we've got to be careful we don't take it to the next level and we start, adoring these people. And we start worshipping these people and placing them on the adulation list, if you like, and suddenly we've got posters in the bedroom of them, or, we know more about these people than we know about the Bible. And we follow them on Instagram, and these people, some of you probably don't know who they are, especially anyone from overseas looking at them, they probably don't. But you get the point, don't you, brothers and sisters and young people? We've got to be so careful we don't get carried away with our admiration. And the people of Israel did, and they got carried away, and in the end Joab was untouchable because of those reasons. And Joab's motto in life, you know what it was? If you could put a motto in his life, very simple, and we know this: the end justifies the means. How easy is that for us to make that our motto? If it's a matter of principle, it doesn't matter how you uphold that principle. You do so at any cost. If it means stepping on brothers and sisters to uphold principles, quite often those principles are our own principles, by the way, not necessarily God's, then it doesn't matter. And that's the Joab coming out in us. We've got to be so careful, because what that is actually meaning, the end justifies the means, what that actually really means is simply this. If our objective is good in our own understanding, then it doesn't matter if the way we achieve it is wrong, bad or evil. And that's the takeaway lesson I get from Joab, because that's what he did all throughout his life. Keep David on the throne at all costs. Oh yeah, I'm going to benefit from that, no doubt about that. But that's what God wants, that's what he put him there for. Keep him there at all costs. The loyalty was huge to David, but I don't care how I go about doing it, and if it means shedding innocent blood, if it means shedding blood in peacetime, if it means stepping all over people, if it means cutting people down to size, I don't care. We've got a lesson, brothers and sisters, we can learn from this man's life, and I think that's the lesson I get from it, and I'm sure there's many other lessons we can get from it as well. So Joab, he was the merciless manipulator, and thus ends our rapid study on Joab's life. May we be very thankful, brothers and sisters, that God put people like that in the Bible, that we can learn from them and learn very carefully from their mistakes.